Welcome to the second session of the Rootwork series. This is designed for grounding community arts education today, in and beyond the pandemic. In addition to this speaker series, we also have a Rootwork cohort of community arts education practitioners who are joining us in this series and also meeting concurrently. In the spring, they will share their responsive programs and/or organizational designs based on the learning that takes place here. And I'm sharing this with you because they are supported by 3 advisors, one of whom launched the series last week, who you may have met, Kalita Jones. A second advisor will be speaking today, Carla Estella Rivera, who you will soon hear from. And a third advisor in the background who you will not meet until the very end of the session is Barbara Mambi Huerta. She's also with us today. So Carla, as a cohort advisor, was very excited to create a space where we could all come together and be in dialogue. Today's session is not a webinar. You will not be talked at entirely. You will be included. And so this format as not a webinar is a meeting space. We can see you. If you do not want to be recorded and you do not want to live on the Guild's archive, that is fine. Just turn off your video. If you are comfortable being recorded, you might live on the archive. It depends on how the editing happens. And if you would like to participate without being recorded, video or audio, you're welcome to put any of the dialogue that you would like to share in the chat box. Carla and I will monitor the chat box and read aloud selections from that chat box so those that cannot access the chat box can hear what you've contributed. What else do you need to know? If written reflection and processing is helpful for you, please be sure that you have a pen and paper nearby. Carla will be asking some very thought-provoking questions. And I think that that is really everything you need to know for housekeeping. Thank you for your patience. I am so thrilled to introduce to you finally the esteemed Carla Estella Rivera. She is the executive director of Free Street Theater in Chicago, and I will let her introduce herself in the way that she is most compelled right now. Welcome, Carla. Welcome all.
Thank you so much. Oh, I'm so excited and so nervous, and it is just really humbling to see all of the wonderful folks that have come together today. So, good afternoon or evening, depending on where you're joining us from. I'm so thrilled to be here with all of you to share a little bit about me, my work, and share some important lessons and strategies that have served me throughout my career and particularly through the last decade, um, and the pillars across all of my work streams. For accessibility purposes, I am a light-skinned Puerto Rican woman with curly pink and purple ombre hair. I'm wearing a floral blouse with pink, purple, and blue accents. I'm wearing clear rimmed glasses and a power red lip and silver hoop earrings, because that's what we're doing today. I'm coming to you from my sunny living room in Chicago. In Chicago, we are occupying the traditional homelands of the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi people. Illinois is also home of the Ho-Chunk, Miami, Anoka, Menominee, Sac, and Fox peoples. And there are over 75,000 tribal members in the state of Illinois, many which live in Chicago. Here in my home, I'm surrounded by my beloved plants that have kept me grounded during my work days throughout this pandemic. The work that I have dedicated my life to over my career is not one that happens in a silo. So I want to give a special shout out, not only to the team at the Guild, my co-advisors, and all that have helped make this particular work possible, but also a special shout out to my team at Free Street Theater, Dr. Goya Paz, our artistic director, and Katrina Dion, our director of education. My partner in arts education policy, Jonathan Vanderbrug over at Arts Alliance Illinois, and to the artists and culture bearers in the great city of Chicago and across the country who continue to do the essential work of being our collective consciousness, our healers, and transmitters of messages and works that challenge us to think audaciously about what it means to do this work and the tables at which we sit. I learn from them. I learn from you every single day. If my greatest hopes are met for today's session, you'll be walking away from it with the following. We can go to the next slide. So first, understanding how to identify and ensure your programming is community-led and informed and centers affirmation, economic opportunity, and capacity building. Second is learning practical strategies for how to build supports for arts education policy change in your state, and develop your own guiding questions and tools to support this work and ensure that you're maximizing your opportunities for community engagement, particularly during COVID-19. And while I do see some familiar faces in this space, it's important for you all to understand the context in which I operate and the lenses in which I come with that have been foundational for both my personal evolution and that of the work that I have done over the last decade plus. And we can move to the next slide. I was born in Mayagüez, Puerto Rico, and raised in Chicago, arriving to the city as a child. I was raised by a single mother who instilled in me a deep pride for my Boricua identity, my work ethic, and a love for the arts. My earliest memories of experiencing arts and culture begin with sharing a writing table with my grandmother, an accomplished writer who began self-publishing poetry in her 50s. Throughout my childhood, I would watch as she slowly and meticulously wrote poems and stories in black felt tip pen on legal pads. Her artistic lens reflecting her experience as a child growing up in rural Puerto Rico in the early 20th century. Through her, I fell in love with words and a continued connection to Puerto Rico. But outside of our home and our community, very few knew her words, or that a 500-page autobiography, the only text of its kind to exist, resides on bookshelves and in libraries across the country. This fueled my desire to become a storyteller, performer, and playwright. But further, it served as the foundation for my lifelong approach to challenging the systems that serve as gatekeepers for stories, who tells them, and whom those stories are for. Latinx stories remain disproportionately underrepresented on screens and stages. And if they're told at all, our narratives are often hijacked by one-dimensional archetypes that rarely capture the breadth of our experiences and rarely center joy and triumph. This dissatisfaction in our representation fueled my artistic path very, very early in life. I often call myself a direct result of philanthropic and municipal investments in arts education programs. In high school, I was among the first wave of young people who leveraged opportunities like Gallery 37, which was a citywide artistic program for young people who were able to get paid to become apprentices in different disciplines. Um, I participated in paid apprenticeships in playwriting and journalism, and those were key to sharpening my skills as an artist and provided mentorship by professionals in the field. And although we have seen an emergence of brilliant works in recent years that bring nuance and depth to our experiences, opportunities to forge ahead as an artist and as a student are really limited in public school systems. And credentialed conservatory programs often create more debt than opportunity. As an emerging artist, it meant that I had to live a double life and build my own avenues. Over the last decade, I lived a double life as a nonprofit worker, where I've taken the breadth of my experience as an artist and writer and used them to develop large-scale outreach initiatives, fundraising plans, youth development programs, and advocacy and policy work that support building the capacity of our communities, predominantly in urban communities of color. I concurrently produced works with Urban Theater Company, performed and co-devised Latina-centered plays with Teatro Luna. As a company member of Second Story, I've spent the last 5 years crafting a body of work that goes beyond representation. As the executive director of Free Street Theater, I ensure that our multi-generational ensembles have the space to create works that are by, for, with and performed within communities and challenged the notion of who theater is for. I'm also the mother of a 9-year-old named Frida who attends Chicago Public Schools, and I'm the wife of an actor and improviser slash sketch artist. I want to share a little bit, just for folks for accessibility purposes, just some of the pictures that are on this slide. On the left, you will see little 6-year-old Carla with her mama in Puerto Rico, surrounded by tropical plants and hibiscus flowers. In the center, you'll see 2 pictures. At the top is a portrait of my grandmother, and below you will see my grandmother on the left and little baby Carla on the right at her writing table. So I have been writing since I was in diapers. And her book is actually, the cover of her book is actually in the top right-hand corner. You'll also see a picture of me wearing a black dress and at the mic. And just a couple of articles where I've been featured and where I have written in high school. My work does not happen if it is not centered or grounded in ensuring that communities can access them. So with every story I write, with every class I teach, with every initiative that I lead, I do so with the goal of creating opportunities for cultural affirmation, collective catharsis, and rightfully taking a seat at the table of compelling narratives woven into the fabric of the collective experience in this country. In this spirit, I want to take a dive into our first exercise, and we can take us out of presentation mode for the moment. So for this, I want everybody to go into the Wayback Machine of their lives. And I want you to think about your life from your earliest memories to this very moment in time and space. I want you to think about a time when you felt affirmed by an artistic or cultural moment that you attended. And I'm not going to give you a lot of time to think about it. I'm going to give you just about a minute to think about it. But this can come in any form of artistic discipline. I want you to think about when in your life you were in this moment, where you were in this moment. Think about the senses. What did you see, taste, hear, smell? What was it that made you feel seen or affirmed? And how did it make you feel? I'm also going to just quickly drop these questions in the chat so that you all can see it. Let's see, everyone. Here we go. So your minute starts now. So for those of you who are just coming in to the space, the question is, let's take a trip to the Wayback Machine and think about a moment in your life from your earliest memories to this very moment in time and space. And I want you to think about a time when you felt affirmed by an artistic or cultural moment that you attended. All right, friends, that minute is over. So I would love for, we can do this a couple ways. You can share, I would love to hear what you have to say, or you can also drop it in the chat. You can use the raise hand function or physically raise your hand. If anybody would like to share.
I'll speak.
Hey,
Is that
Kalita.
okay, Carla?
Yeah, of course.
um, a time that I felt affirmed by an artistic or cultural moment was probably when I was in Acarigua, Venezuela in 2012. It was my first time in Venezuela, and I was teaching there to understand the El Sistema movement that was happening in Venezuela. And for me, as an American Black woman, and going into a culture that has a lot of similarities culturally, but not being able to find where I fit in the state, going to Venezuela, it was just so affirming because they immediately embraced me as one of the sisters and one of the family. And, you know, I went to different students' homes and spent time with their families and learned about the different meals they cooked. And it was just a time to really build those relationships in Venezuela. And many of those students I'm still in contact with, even right now during COVID and over the last 7 or 8 years of that journey there. It was a profound effect on them and also on myself. And that was the moment for me where it was like, okay, it doesn't matter when I come back to the States if I don't feel like I belong. There is a space in Venezuela where I know that I would be welcomed home, for lack of a different word. So that was probably one of the most powerful, affirming moments.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to jump over to the chat. Lunar New Year, my daughter lion dancing, the smell of firecrackers, and ooh, the chat is just jumping. So give me a second. And fresh hand pulled noodles, the sound of gongs, cymbals, and firecrackers. Ah, I just want to be there. The feeling of family, community, history, the noting of a year passing. Georgina wrote, in second grade, when I brought home a painting of a woman from the Seminole tribe that I had painted in school, my mom framed it and hung it in our living room. I felt like a true artist. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Rizal has raised their hand. Rizal, do you want to share?
Thank you, Carla. So it made me recall a moment that I had, or well, I guess I should say that I usually hate public speaking, and so my experience in public speaking spaces are like people looking at me. Ooh, this person did this, and it's like a show, you know. Like I feel like I'm a thing on a show, and so one time I did a talk for Creative Mornings and I was a little bit reluctant because I was like, oh, am I going to feel the same way when I do this again? And when I got there, my community was there. I saw my students, I saw my friends, I saw other teachers locally. It was the first time where I really felt, wow, the community showed up. Like the people that I came here to talk to are here. And at the end of the conversation, you know, there was a Q&A and someone said to me, Riz, you made me feel like it's okay to be Filipino. And I was like, it really just hit home because I thought, wow, all those times maybe I felt insecure. It was like I had that same feeling like, should I not be here? Do I not deserve to be here? And so to hear someone else say it out loud was, I felt it like radiate through my whole body, like from my chest out all the way through my fingers. I was like, I can't believe that like we feel okay, basically. I don't know. It was a
That's
nice.
beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. We have one more. Mariah, did you raise your hand?
Hi, my name is Mariah or Raya, whichever. One of I was struggling until the last person spoke up. Um, I let's see. I wrote down being with cultures where I can have conversation through dance. Where I grew up, uh, dancing was really important, and so dancing is like a language for me. But then when I moved out to where I'm at now, I didn't find that opportunity. Um, and so, like, the few moments where I would stumble into it, it would be a gift. And one of those gifts was actually when I was able to visit Louisiana. and being able to hear people play the music and allowing like it being an open up space where I'd be able to just speak through dance, and then seeing that their dance was affirming what my body was doing. um and it's always really fun for me to be able to have conversation through movement like that. And so I was really seeing, and I appreciate like uh Louisiana culture for how that contributes to that kind of expression of raw art and expression.
That's wonderful. There are so many wonderful entries in the chat that are, um, I have not read them all, but I'm going to read them all when I save this chat. But it is so, the detail in which some of you have really truly dropped some of this information is lovely. And it is lovely to know that so many of you have had um, affirming moments through arts and culture. And I think to me, that's inspiring, and it's central to the work that we do. Now I want to go to our second exercise. And this is where we need to spill the tea, okay? Or the chisme, or in Puerto Rico, we say bochinche. I want you to get back in that Wayback Machine. And in the same spirit that you thought about the most affirming cultural moment, now I want you to think about the least affirming cultural moment that you went to. Like, and same questions. When were you in this moment? Where were you in this moment? Oh, thank you, Ivy. What was that experience like? Think about the senses. And how did it make you feel? So spill the tea, my friends. And you have, again, just a minute. Luisa wrote, I blocked them out. That's amazing. Sadly, too many. About 20 seconds left, my friends. My God, I'm already reading the tea and it is piping hot. All right, friends, let's wrap it up. First, I'm going to start with the chat because the chat is lit right now and I am offended. When I was asked to change a poem in order to make a white-centered audience comfortable, being told that the only reason why I was asked to do a TEDx talk was because of affirmative action. Ugh. Being shouted at because I turned down an audition that I felt was inappropriate for me. I took one of my students with me to a meeting. Many other EDs, at the end of the meeting, they said, do you always let people talk to you that way? It made me think, when people are mean to me, it doesn't just impact me. Sorry about that outside. They're drag racing, apparently. It impacts the people who look up to me. UCLA campus, 2013. I did not mean to do that. Students were filming a video to celebrate the mascot's birthday. They were asking students to describe our mascot in one word. A friend and I said, brown, we are Latinx. The student filming our answer asked us to change it because it was potentially too political. So many feelings, friends. Did anybody want to share verbally? I don't know if anybody raised their hand, but I am reading all this news. Beverly.
This is an event that happened in my adult life, in a meeting with coworkers. I was asked to respond to something. I did, in fact, respond to it. That comment was sort of ignored and brushed aside. And then basically the same comment idea was expressed by a male coworker, and it was then affirmed and accepted and applauded. That is an event that it doesn't happen anymore. I don't work anymore, but happened many times over the course of my career. So a time when I did not feel affirmed or supported, and it's a feeling. The action occurs. The feeling afterward is one of, why didn't I speak up? Because then over time I have learned to speak up, but there were what was that early time when I did not speak up and was sad about not speaking up. But then it happened enough that, once you get to the point where you say, okay, enough is enough, then that one time the first time that it happened where I did in fact speak up was one when I felt more affirmed, more courageous. And now I would never let that happen again.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks for listening.
Of course. Kalita.
Yeah, so I just want to briefly touch on the fact that being asked to do a TEDx talk was like probably one of the biggest moments in my life. And I definitely went through hell to have that moment. Like, I had to go through some real stuff in order to be prepared to share the breaking story of how we can best support our students in communities with untapped potential. And so for it to get back to me that other educators felt that the only reason that that opportunity was presented was because of affirmative action and not because of those seeds that I was planting in the community was so devastating. And we learned very quickly how to build walls to protect ourselves and our emotions and our visions, because we don't want to feel, nobody wants to be rejected. But then when you add that extra layer of, but because of something, that's the reason you were invited to do it, versus because the work you're doing is really transformative and we want to share it with the world. Those are two very different lanes. And, I find that a lot. It's very easy for people to subtly put that kind of thought process into commentary. Mm-hmm. And it's frustrating because then I'm already still working 14 times harder. So that just makes those moments incredibly challenging.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And there's just all sorts of, there's all sorts of stories within the chat, starting with the joyful ones for the first part of the exercise to the not so joyful spots, right, from the exercise. And so, and the things that I'm hearing, from on the affirmation side, we hear comfort, empowerment, recognition, being at home, feeling seen, right? And that those moments become embedded and become moments that that make you that are normalizing for us, right? And then when we're not so affirmed, we're triggered, we are angry, we are offended, we are sad, we do not feel like then we're part of a larger ecosystem, that and that we are not, that we don't matter, right? That we are not somehow part of the tapestry that is, the art making and the culture making and the storytelling of this country. And so I want to thank you all for sharing your reflections, um, because they are important, both the joyful memories and also the not so joyful memories, and some not even just not so joyful, but absolutely, um, some of them can be traumatizing. And to that end, um, what we do with those things are, it is both sides of those coins that help kind of lead my work and the work that I have done over the years. And so thank you all for coming through, for being so open with these stories that you shared, and not only with me but with the group. And we can go back into presentation mode, friends. Thank you so much. So for me, growing up, I didn't experience a lot of moments that affirmed my identity as a young Puerto Rican in Chicago. In fact, my earliest experiences in this country often reaffirmed or reinforced idealizing archetypes and stories that were not grounded at all in my experience in my community, nor did they have representation at the helm to center our stories from a leadership perspective. As a parent, I'm afforded the opportunity and privilege to experience some of these things through my daughter's eyes, and particularly cultural moments. My daughter is growing up in a very different reality. And despite the deep intentional work that still needs to happen in this country, she was born in the era of the first Black president, who very much resembles her biracial Afro-Boricua grandfather. And together we experience the cultural phenomenon that is Miles Morales, one of the newest characters to carry the legacy of Spider-Man. Sidebar, I'm a total nerd for this stuff. And this is why it was even more so such an impactful moment for me. Because there's something incredibly profound that happens when you experience a cultural moment and the characters look like you or your family, when your dialect and cadence is normalized, and when someone whose experience resembles yours is lifted to the status of hero, particularly at this scale. When he was centered, we were centered. Into the Spider-Verse for me was a clear moment. Not only did we get to see an Afro Latinx character elevated in Miles, but we also got to see various manifestations of the Spider-Man character and leave this experience knowing that anyone can wear the mask. So throughout my presentation this afternoon, I'm going to show you some distinct ways this has come up in my work. And I want to start with Free Street Theater, where I have the honor of serving as executive director. And in this slide, you just see the very different, you see Miles before and Miles after as Spider-Man. And we're gonna move on to Free Street. So for over 50 years, Free Street has used theater and public performance as a tool to defy Chicago's racial and economic segregation, putting it at the forefront of the movement to create affordable, inclusive, and innovative theater in communities across Chicago. We do this by making work by, for, about, with, and in Chicago's diverse communities. We believe that theater matters, and if it matters, we should find ways to make it as accessible and inviting to as many people as possible, both in performance and in process. We have 2 multi-generational ensembles, 2 youth ensembles, which is the heart of our arts education programming. We train directors and theater leaders, and also support local BIPOC artists in the development and production of new works through our in-house program. And we provide administrative, financial, and production supports for them. At the heart of our artistic process is the fact that outside of our in-house programming, you will never see a play that has already been done. So you won't see a modern rendition of Twelfth Night. Even a revival of previous shows that we have done will include nearly all new content, as our devised process is designed to create works that are responsive to what is happening and directly affecting our communities. By centering our communities, their stories, and the issues that are living in them at the moment, we ensure that our work truly reflects and affirms them. So we also do this in a few other ways. We not only gather our community stories as part of the creation of our devised plays, often these very community members join us as members of our ensemble. So social workers, teachers, retirees, students, folks from all walks of life who would otherwise not have an opportunity to experience theater as a co-creator or a performer come to us. We partner with community organizations whose missions align with our work. So that way, our work serves as a tactic in an overall activist strategy. For example, our digital play Wasted, which was our youth show, is a play focused on environmental racism in Chicago. For that show, we partnered with the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization. And through this partnership, our youth deepened their understanding of the issue of environmental racism and environmental justice. We co-amplify the show and the work through this partnership, and we create opportunities for joint fundraising and communications. Additionally, all of our shows are free or pay what you can. In the summer, we tour our shows in parks across the city. We offer free children's co-programming during our shows, and we pay our artists. At a time when the average non-equity performer in the city of Chicago makes less than $2 an hour, our artists make 15. Wage equity, my friends. We will never reach any kind of equity in our sector if we don't start paying our artists a living wage. In recent years, we have taken this all city model and established our first hyper-local space, the Storyfront. Before I move over to the Storyfront, I want to share a little bit about what you're seeing in the image here. On the top left corner, you're going to see about 100 artists, and in that photo, we were just about to embark on a history-making performance called 50 and 50. So for our 50th anniversary as a theater, we performed in all 50 Chicago wards in one day. So 50 plays, 50 wards in one day. And so that was the day before we were about to embark on that journey. To the right, you'll see our founding ensemble, which was founded in 1969. And it is the first, if not one of the first, integrated theater companies in the city of Chicago. To the left, to the bottom left, you will see one of our youth ensembles in our show called Parched, which was about water justice. And so you see a young African-American woman in the center with students all around begging for water. And on the right is a show that we did with our Storyfront Youth Ensemble that was focused on prom and affirming not only the students from the community, but also LGBTQ students within this show. So in terms of the Storyfront, Ricardo Gamboa, a former resident artist, developed his show Meet Juanito Doe, a play that centers Mexican Americans and Mexican immigrants on the South Side. Rather than producing this show in our theater on the north side of the city, Ricky really wanted to ensure that this play was accessible to the people whom this story centered on. But here's the rub. There were no existing performance spaces in the community where this play could be performed. So it was through an existing relationship with the building owner who had an unused storefront in the back of the Yards community that we found a space to produce this show. There, Meet Juanito Doe played to sold out audiences for an entire year. Our data shows that these audiences comprise mostly of members from the community. Residents not only enjoyed the show, they also identified a need for a hyperlocal for us, by us performance space and artistic hub. So we took on the space full time and established the Storyfront, where we not only apply our model of devised plays and work, but also move intentionally to ensure that what we do in this space is community created and owned. 80% of any revenue allocated to the Storyfront is directly invested into the community. So we're not going to Amazon for set pieces. We're going directly to vendors in the city. If we're throwing a party of some sort and we need food, we're going to the vendors within the community. So we try very much to do that to the best of our abilities. We're also recipients of the Neighborhood Opportunity Fund, which is a citywide initiative to bolster businesses on Chicago's South and West Side. Our multi-generational ensemble is a group of mothers from back of the yards called Hood Moms. And through Hood Moms, we not only began story circles so that these women could learn how to tell stories, but we also paid them and trained them to facilitate their own story circles. So now we're moving on to our fourth cohort with different facilitators and more mothers coming in to tell their stories. We also have a community liaison position that is dedicated specifically for somebody who is from back of the yards, that serves kind of as an extension of me and the organization that can meet at in community, that can go to community meetings, that can be the voice, but also can also hear what is happening in the community so that we can continue to be responsive and in direct service in whatever way that we can. It's important to note here that while we've moved with intention across the city for over the last 50 years, we knew that we had to operate with a more vigilant set of intentions when we opened up our hyperlocal space. No member of our current leadership currently resides on the south or west sides of the city. And while we do have incredibly positive relationships with the city or with the community residents and our collaborators, they're still very guarded and protective of their community. And we certainly understand why this would be the case. Often, what has happened in Chicago is that we've seen arts organizations parachuting into communities to harvest stories that are then created for stages that are inaccessible to the very communities they center. Or they take root in particular communities without doing the work of really getting to know them. So they're creating prescriptive programming that is not informed by the needs of the community. They're not creating opportunities for community members to increase their skill sets, have a space where they can convene and organize, or even see themselves in the art making that is taking place. We have also seen at its most problematic state how these new residents, if you will, end up becoming harbingers of gentrification, which then leads to displacement and markedly exacerbates the challenges many community residents have. We know that it takes time to build rapport and trust in any new venture, particularly one that is not rooted in our own community. So with that, we don't take things personally when we are educated about how a community particularly works and how they want to be treated. In fact, we welcome it, we consistently ask for it, and we incorporate that into our work. Through that model that we've created, we certainly come to the table with the Free Street ethos and the way of making art. But within the Free Street, within that Free Street container, we provide a ton of flexibility for communities to truly play in the sandbox, both creatively and with a spirit of self-determination. Through active dialogues, we learn about the kinds of skills they would like to build, the events they would want, and how we can open up the space beyond art making. So the space truly serves at the intersection of theater, community engagement, and organizing. And this Saturday, we're actually going to be opening up our first ever 24-hour accessible free pantry for the community. Because back of the yards, their COVID cases are incredibly high, and the economic challenges are even more challenging for them. So even though we can't make theater right now, we can make something. And so that is the thing that we're currently doing there. So as we consider these intersections of community engagement and organizing and art making and the artistic process, and the many ways that we can wear the mask, I want to shift us from Free Street to policy work, a space where, in my experience, artists often are only invited to the table for an ephemeral moment, to pull at the heartstrings in a moment of advocacy, but aren't necessarily invited as meaningful contributors to processes that lead to system change. So I would love for you all to take a moment to reflect on the following questions, and fully knowing, yeah, let's change the slide over. And I'm going to drop these questions also in the chat. So all of us are in very different places, particularly when it comes to policy, but I would love for y'all to think about, what is the status of arts education in your state? How do you view your role in shaping and advocating for arts education policy? Are you aware of any initiatives in your state to include the arts in a statewide accountability system? What barriers and opportunities are you facing in your arts education advocacy? Who's not at the table that needs to be brought into the bigger education policy table? Is it you? And if it's not you, then who? And which stakeholders are particularly important for you to convince? Who do you need to call in to the effort? What messages would connect with them? I'm not sure in terms of just where folks are at within that journey, or if there are folks that are deeply involved in policy or have been thinking about policy. But if any of these questions resonate and you would like to share, we can, yes, we can stop the slide, share, and just have a little bit of a conversation around it. So if anybody has, we won't go through all of the questions, but I would love to get a sense from the group what work they may have done around arts education advocacy within their state or within their city, and what that world looks like, kind of based on the questions that I have laid out. And again, you can either physically raise your hand or use the raise hand function, or just put it in the chat.
I can share something.
I would love that.
I'm Judith Ryder. And I'm in Cleveland. I run the Cleveland Arts Education Consortium, and we have a large network of members. But more importantly, we have a large number of arts and culture organizations in Cleveland and Greater Cleveland and throughout the state. And fortunately, for many years, there has been an organization for the state called the Ohio, I'll think of it in a minute, but
Ohio Alliance for Arts Education.
Thank you. Ohio Alliance for Arts Education. There's that, but there is also Ohio Citizens for the Arts, which is the organization I was thinking of, because they are our connections to policymakers at the state level. And with new leadership, they are really, really working hard to get the identity of the arts industry and all of us on the map of Ohio for the governor. And you all know what we have to keep doing over and over again, but this is a very active group, and it is a wonderful organization, been around for a long while, but is very active now, as they need to be. And as we all know in the arts, we have to be repetitively active. So we're lucky to have that. But it means we have to stay engaged and active Carla.
That's
And
right.
I love your questions. I love your questions.
Thank you so much. And have you all begun any kind of initiative for bringing arts education into statewide policy, like into the ESSA plan?
It is certainly very much a part of the Ohio Department of Education. There is a fine arts consultant there, has always been, and they're working on new standards, and they are very aware of arts organizations throughout the state that want to partner and do partner with children and schools. So there's active work here. It's never enough, but you know, he's at the table. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. I also want to share, Kari wrote, I hope I pronounced that right. In Colorado, the State Department of Economic Development has a creative industries division, which is very active within the arts community to advocate as well as provide training, convening, and funding for us. Ohio is showing up, man. That's wonderful. In 2003, Andrea wrote, in 2003, the legislature in New Mexico passed the Fine Arts Education Act that embedded the arts into the funding formula for grades K through 6. Yes. The arts are defined as visual, dance, music, theater, and media. Yes, the 5 disciplines. And the battle continues to extend to middle school. A few years ago, so Anne wrote a few years ago in Vermont. I love Vermont. I started as a teaching artist in Vermont, FYI. The arts community was successful in advocating for bringing back the position of arts education specialist at the Agency of Arts Education. These are wonderful shares, and this excites me. I am a huge policy wonk, and I believe that more artists need to be involved at the decision-making tables at the municipal level and at the state level and also at the national level. So kudos to all of the organizations that are on their journey. We can go back to the slides now, and I want to talk a little bit about the Illinois Fine Arts Indicator as part of the Every Student Succeeds Act in the state of Illinois. So Illinois is one of only 2 states, the other Connecticut, with a distinct weighted arts indicator, and the only state applying it to both elementary and high schools. So what does this mean? I'm going to go back in the Wayback Machine, friends, and take it to the beginnings of the federal Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA for short. Enacted in 2015, ESSA calls on every state to have a system of school accountability and support, but gives states considerable flexibility in how they design their system. So under ESSA, states can look beyond the academic indicators of performance, such as test scores, and consider multiple holistic indicators of school quality and student success. This ignited a national conversation amongst the arts education community. This was our chance to be meaningfully included in school accountability systems. As the Illinois State Board of Education, also known as ISB, began the work of designing our state's ESSA plan, the arts education community proposed that the arts serve as an indicator of school quality and student success. So ISB conducted its work through a series of public comment periods and drafts over the course of 2016 to 2017. Arts Alliance Illinois, Ingenuity in Chicago, where I previously served as Director of Public Affairs, and the statewide arts education community implemented a multifaceted campaign advocating for the arts to be included as a school quality indicator. Yes. The board did, so during its public comment periods, ISB received more than 5,500 comments in support of the arts indicator, more than the combined total of all other comments related to ESSA. And so the board responded affirmatively, establishing the arts as one of the only 5 school quality indicators for elementary and one of the 5 for high school. But the board also recognized that we were entering new territory. No one had really done this before. So it weighted the arts indicator at 0%, but it did commit to giving the indicator weight in the future once a sound measurement was determined. Our slogan was, well, 0 isn't nothing. The arts had its foot in the accountability system door. So at the invitation of the state board, we formed the Illinois ESSA Arts Indicator Work Group in January 2018 to develop and recommend to the board a sound measurement and weight for the indicator. But it's important to note that a lot of foundational groundwork was done both by the Alliance and statewide arts advocacy groups and by Ingenuity and Chicago Public Schools, which despite its size is a lower resourced district. However, the collective impact work done and advocacy that took place at Chicago Public Schools nearly a decade ago led to a sea change in the way that arts education was being done in the city. And as the largest district in the state, they truly established a blueprint for going statewide. This, paired with the Illinois Arts Learning Standards, created an excellent foundation for the work we were going to embark on. Given the journey that it took for the arts indicator's initial inclusion and its 0 designation in the accountability system, we knew that we needed to assemble a diverse work group. Not one that was just racially diverse, but geographically diverse. So we were cognizant that the bulk of the leadership was housed in Chicago. And we were very intentional in making sure that we recruited work group members from across the state and from across the stakeholder experience. So we had representatives from labor unions, higher ed, to systems leaders and superintendents, as well as individual teachers, teaching artists, and quite a few of us were also public school parents. And before the rubber met the road, we set guiding principles by which we operate. We can move to the next slide. So our guiding principles were being focused, so centered and directed by its primary goals. Inclusive, so statewide, engaging a wide array of stakeholders and reflecting Illinois' diversity. Collaborative, so recognizing the equal value of all voices, and as best as we could, we sought consensus. Collaborative, so recognizing the equal, we already did that one. Transparent, so sharing information and deliberating openly. And audacious, so creative, seeking opportunity and challenges, and being willing to consider all of the approaches. In addition, the work group collectively determined guiding principles. In addition to the principles, we also established group agreements that must be present in any product that we presented to ISBE. These principles include the following: that it be student-centered, that it be essential, fair, actionable, multidisciplinary, and that it met ESSA requirements. We started our first meeting being called upon to be audacious with our work. Audaciousness and innovation at the state level is hard, and there are so many lenses to consider. So with these guiding principles in hand, a blueprint that helped guide initial conversations, and a data team to help provide insights, we engaged in over 500 combined hours of conversation over a year. And through our data and research team, the work group conducted the most extensive analysis to date of Illinois statewide arts education data. Another thing to note is that advocacy and culture building was woven into the work group space, very much like we would do a devised play at Free Street. So we invited students and their teachers to nearly every work group session to demonstrate their artistic discipline, share the impact of arts education in their lives, and have direct testimony and feedback from teachers. And this helped really ground our process and keep us centered in the work. We narrowed down the measure from 42 potential measures to one composite measure. And we can, you'll see that in the next slide. One, the work group presented a recommended measure that reflects a fuller story of the arts in schools beyond just access. And two, Fairness was a core consideration of the work group, which sought to measure, which sought a measure that was aspirational, but not punitive, understanding that resources vary by school. To the latter point, the biggest argument against the arts indicator's inclusion was this notion that it would be an unfunded mandate that would ultimately be punitive for under-resourced schools. But the most significant finding of one of the work group's data analysis was that there appeared to be no strong correlation between student arts participation and school funding. In fact, many lower funded schools not only recognize the value of the arts in closing the achievement gap, but they were finding ways to make arts happen because of how impactful it was within their schools. So the fundamental issue of equity is that all Illinois students, no matter which school they attended, needed and deserved quality arts education, a truth that must be incorporated into the accountability system and reflected in the arts indicators measure. And the Illinois State Board of Education agreed. On March 18th, 2020, the ISB board took a bold and visionary step. It approved unanimously the core of the work group's recommendation, namely that the arts indicator is distinct, like other subject-specific indicators such as science proficiency, rather than being grouped with other learning areas, and that it would be weighted at 5 points, 5 points out of 100. It consists of 3 submeasures. The first is participation, or what we also like to call it access. So the participation rate is basically the school's total number of students enrolled in one or more arts courses divided by that school's total number of students. This is more effective than just than access writ large because it reflects the actual student engagement rather than simply the possibility of it. The indicator tells a fuller story than just participation in arts learning. It measures the quality of that learning by considering the qualifications of the teachers providing it. So at 2% of that measure is the quality submeasure, which is the school's total number of students enrolled in one or more arts courses taught by an arts endorsed teacher, divided by that school's total number of students enrolled in one or more arts courses. Also under consideration for elementary schools is the inclusion of arts courses taught by a licensed teacher whom Illinois statute and regulations consider fully qualified to teach those particular courses. We also have a third element, which is student voice. For us, and not only as a personal cornerstone of my work, but collectively as part of the work group, we felt that student voice was critical to a well-rounded measure. This will consist eventually of a student survey, but it is currently weighted at 0 as a placeholder in recognition that such a survey does not exist yet. So ISB and the arts education community will explore it and how to address the challenges over the next couple of years. So through this process, we learned some key lessons, and we can move on to the next slide to share some of those. So the first is that we needed to ensure accessibility to advocate for all stakeholders. So we needed to remove the technological, geographic, and other barriers that limited the ways people could effectively weigh in and add value to these critical conversations. For example, when the new superintendent was appointed, Dr. Carmen Ayala, part of her work was to collect feedback forms from stakeholders, both through a listening tour and a survey. We brought as many folks as we could to every stop on the listening tour. We drove people, we communicated out to folks when those stops were happening. We also led a webinar that walked through the survey that they released, that if you've ever seen kind of a statewide, very dry, non-user friendly survey, it was very cumbersome and daunting for many folks whose world this isn't, right? So we walked them through it, particularly folks who often don't interface with systemic processes. And we made sure that stakeholders were not only able to share their voice in the process, that they felt included, and they also were able to add comment to the ESSA system writ large. We leveraged data to support the story. So again, data showed and questioned the assumption of lower resource schools not being able to or not doing arts at all. So through the data, we were able to show again that there was not a huge correlation between school resources and the provision of arts courses. Not significant at all. And yes, there were some, but not as many as the opposition was leading folks to believe. Weave artists into the process as much as possible. There is no movement that has not been carried through a vessel of art. So bring them into the policy table in their authentic way. And relationships are key. Not only was it important to build relationships within the work group itself, but also with decision makers, particularly with the ISB board. Bring in representatives from every facet of arts education. So different angles, career pathways, social emotional learning, higher ed, teachers, students, administrators. These are all important folks within the ecosystem to engage. Provide opportunities to tell the story. Targeted stories from stakeholders from across the state were incredibly important in this process. And also remember that this is a long game. So it's not going, it took us a good 3 years before the Illinois Fine Arts Indicator was adopted. But throughout that time, you lay the groundwork for even greater impact later on, which will secure resources and even larger policy wins. And so that is ESSA. And we're going to move on to, we're in the home stretch, my friends. I'm thinking about a COVID pivot and DEI considerations. And I want to acknowledge that I have probably thrown a ton of food for thought to you over our time together. And I want to name that so much of this work and experiences that I've shared with you today were begun pre-COVID. So as we consider our collective work during these times, during a global pandemic, and the uprisings and national reckoning that emerged for racial justice in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, there are a few things we need to recognize. We are all in different places in this journey. There are organizations that are at the very beginning of their own excavations and internal reckonings when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Others have these values embedded in their ethos since their inception. On the pandemic side of things, it's important to recognize that there are some things that just cannot be done virtually. To engage in live space also has its risks and challenges. So while I talk about what Free Street has done in this space, I want to name that our approach isn't one size fits all. When the pandemic hit, I was about 5 months into my role as ED of Free Street. As a brand new executive director, I really have to be honest, I was paralyzed by the road ahead. It was one thing to be a new org leader. It was a whole other thing than to do that in the nebula of a pandemic. I have to give a whole lot of props to my board chair, who in those early weeks of the pandemic told us all to rest. And I want to say that again. She told us all to rest. And I want to, in this moment, lift the work of the NAP ministry and Tricia Hersey Patrick, the NAP bishop, who truly inspired us to take care of ourselves first, rather than being focused on productivity. After taking a couple of weeks to recalibrate ourselves, we certainly did have to identify how we would move forward with our arts education programming. We were about a month away from opening our youth show, Wasted. And top of mind for us was, how do we honor the work our teens developed over the course of a year? And for context, our youth spend at least a year together identifying, researching an issue that is directly affecting them. And then through this work, they are also trained in a conservatory style conservatory style approach to devised work. So this led to further exploration. How do we remain a safe space for our youth who considered our physical space a safe haven? How do we keep our artists paid? We knew that what we couldn't do. So we began to think deeply about what we could do. So we partnered with the filmmakers who helped us create our documentary and developed a digital play. And I'm going to play this first piece for all of you. Ivy, I think I can share screen. And then, great. And then I will do this. I will share. And I'm just gonna play, we'll start with this one.
Every day I wake up, I take public transportation to the city center, and I clean the spaces that you spend all your time in but never think about. Hotels, office buildings, hospitals.
I want you to know that we are the foundation of the whole city.
I want you to know I'm overlooked. I'm taken for granted.
We were always around to clean up and make things feel beautiful, but you never wanted to see us. Our presence made your world feel ugly, I guess.
And now we're essential, but still treated as disposable.
I want you to know I work almost 24/7.
I want you to know that I barely sleep and eat.
I want you to know I barely spend time with my kids.
I want you to know I work until my hands ache and my feet cramp.
For me, the word clean is just aching arms, dry and cracked skin on my hands, and the knowledge that my own home still needs to be clean too.
We are the owners of these invisible bodies, women of color, that make it possible for your capitalism dressed in sustainable clothing.
Everything needs to be clean.
The food you eat must be clean, your children must be clean, your sidewalks must be clean, your houses, your yoga studios, your daycares.
I understand.
Clean spaces make us happy.
I want you to know that without your cleaning ladies, without us essential workers, your world becomes piles of trash, unwashed bed sheets, and mud-caked floors.
I want you to know that this work was hard and dangerous before you saw us, and it will still be hard and dangerous when life goes back to normal for you.
I want you to know if it wasn't for us, there would be no cleanness.
I want you to know that I'm so very tired and nowhere near done.
It's all a part of the economy of exhaustion.
Liberal and neoliberal countries rest on mining to exhaustion the bodies of migrants and people of color.
We want you to stop treating us like we're the garbage we're pick up.
And then you know what? I will play also. So this is, one moment, sorry. Too many windows, friends. And let's see, here we go. Is that right? Sorry. Oop, apologies. I think I should have just played the second one as well. But while I'm finding my place again, so that was an excerpt from our show Wasted, which was created by our young people. So everything that you see here was written by our young people and performed by our young people. And we created these mobile kits that we cleaned and sanitized and brought to their homes. And they filmed themselves and learned how to, in a very short period of time, create work that they had been rehearsing for over a year in real time and space. And our Storyfront Youth Ensemble also created a game play called Essential, which explores labor in back of the yards, where we partnered with a game designer to help us create a show in a fun and interactive way, while still capturing our vibe as a theater company and the intent of the work. And so I am going to now play that piece for you as well. So I'm going to share my screen again. And let's find, we will find, oops. Here we go. And there we go.
Honestly, a lot. There's this feeling I guess sometimes I just can't shake. I just want to pick up my ukulele guitar and just start playing. I have these songs I haven't just have they're tapped, and I just can't keep reworking them. Not really because they're practicing for performance or anything, but just because they make me happy and they help me to calm down. And they help me think about how I'd love to do this as a career one day, or how I'm lucky enough now to do it as part of my job. In my head, I'm thinking, I do have a job. But what I keep hearing from my family and even society is, you should try and get a real job so you can finally know what it means to work. What it means to work? Performing songs and acting is my job that I get paid for. Why doesn't that count as work? But I don't say anything in response. I go to my room, flop on my bed, and cry. It hurts me to think that if I don't get a quote-unquote real job, the kind of job my parents want for me, and I'm not making them proud. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with office jobs or working retail. They're jobs. I just know this wouldn't make me happy. This job makes me happy. And I know there are a lot of people who aren't able to choose to do work that brings them joy. So why isn't my work real? Under capitalism, creativity is only rewarded when it's productive. When it produces enough money to support a certain lifestyle. We hear it all the time, especially in the Latinx community. So many of our parents were forced to work hard jobs for low wages at such a young age. There was no room for creativity because all they were supposed to do was make enough money to live to the next day. Working under capitalism as a queer person of color means that I either spend way too long trying to find a job, or I find a job but I make an unfair amount compared to my white cisgendered counterparts. I have no room to have a job being creative because I'm spending way too long trying to find a job in general. In the future, when my kids or my little sisters start to find jobs of their own, I want the word labor to mean anything they want. I want labor to not be a word that weighs down their soul and takes away their freedom, but just another word to define what their job is. Labor in the future should be stable and comfortable and be able to provide a certain lifestyle no matter what the job is without making everyone a carbon copy of one another. There should be a deep-rooted love in what labor is and what you do for your job because it makes you happy. I would love to see doctors that love being doctors, or an artist that has the full, unwavering support of their parents. Hey, you can get that if you want.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing now. So those were just two representatives of the pieces that we were able to create, and they really are, for me, the reasons why I do the work that I do. I think when I saw the second piece, Vic's piece, it truly spoke to me as somebody who started writing at the age of 16. And so to that end, they've truly served as not only a source of inspiration, but also, a confirmation that young people need to be not only centered as part of this work, but also included in this work. And, thinking about the communities which you all are also serving, I want to acknowledge, the age diversity as well in the space. And I know that I have been very youth heavy in the work that I have been sharing, but really truly having that, these perspectives and these pieces at the table truly kind of ground and root me in the work that I'm doing. I just want to grab one more. We are almost done here. I know that this has been a long, this has been a long moment, so just give me just 1 second. And apologies, friends. Ay, ay, ay. All of my technology is now going slow. So again, I'm really proud of these pieces and what they represent. And there's a great deal of hope in these pieces. And while they represent the labor of our young people, they also represent a collective commitment to not only continuing arts education programming, but also to a reimagining of what can be in times that seem so very upside down, what we're able to create. As you all continue to traverse your own journeys as artists and within your organizations, both on the racial, cultural equity piece and in the service piece within the programs you provide, I really invite you to consider or revisit the core questions you may be wrestling with at your own organizations. And so with that, I want to, every single one of us truly has the ability to affect change within our spheres of influence. And like Miles Morales, we must all encounter the various journeys that help us determine how we can put on the mask and do the critical work that lifts us all. Many thanks to all of you for what you do out in the world. And I hope that these insights have been helpful. And if we've got time for it, I know we've maybe gone over, oh, we're almost at time, but if you have any questions, I'm certainly open to stay a little longer and be in community with you all. And I want to thank you all for your time.
Thank you so much, Carla. You can see across video screens people clapping and holding their hands in Anjali for you. I would like to extend Carla's invitation. If you would like to have Q&A with her, we can go a little bit past the hour. And of course, if you need to leave at 6 p.m. Eastern, please leave. We know that we all have very busy lives. This is a big thank you to Carla, a big thank you to all and each of you for the work that you hold and nurture and bring to our communities. We are exploring how to do our work in new ways and in deeper ways because of the pandemic. And may this be a marked change for all of us in our deepening of our practices. Next week, we will come back together for part 3 of this series. This session is called Community First, Technology Second, Effective Strategies for Digital Tool Presenters. And that will be presented by Joaquin Ortiz of the Museum of Photographic Arts in San Diego and Adam Sherlock from Spy Hop Productions in Salt Lake City. And of course, we also have going on simultaneously is the Compass series looking at anti-racism practices in arts organizations. All of that information is available on our website. And if you want to get together and talk and have juicy conversations, we also have ongoing community conversations around arts disciplines and our various practices. And those are great places to connect and share questions with everyone and generate ideas. So back to the Q&A section. For those of you who've stuck around, Carla, we're here to create community with you now.
Great. Thank you for the unmute thing. I'm Heidi and I'm from Vermont, and thank you so much, Carla. I was interested, and maybe this is planting a seed for the next conversation, but in the advocacy group that you had to change the ESSA policy, what was the time commitment? What was the ask? How did you recruit and how was that organized? It seems like a powerful, innovative group, and people seem to be at capacity right now. So I'm just curious if you have any tips or suggestions for how that evolved.
Yeah, so although myself and Jonathan Vanderbrug at Arts Alliance Illinois were kind of the co-chairs of the group, we also had what we called the G5 or the group of 5, which were also the Illinois Art Education Association, the Illinois Music Education Association, and Chicago Public Schools. And so it was through that initial group that then we began identifying folks to recruit into the process. There were also folks that needed to be at the table. So there are some statewide mandated groups that needed to have representatives. So they were already kind of automatically in. But in developing our list, we really, wanted to make sure that we were as representative of the ecosystem as possible. And so like I pulled into my, I come from the streets and I've been doing, community organizing for a long time. So I knew that I could pull from a specific pool. And so I think it became, because time was of the essence, and also, capacity was a thing even pre-COVID. We kind of all took pieces that we knew we could manage very quickly and very easily for that initial assembly. And then collectively, we determined what our schedule was. And then, of course, those of us that were kind of leading the space, we dedicated way more time than the rest of the collective. But we met monthly, and we met monthly in person or online, and then there was just the work of kind of the making sure that folks were voting on the different measures and things like that. So I think altogether was 500 hours of together time over the course of 2 years.
Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions you might have? Andrea? Sorry.
Fine. The more syllables a name has, the more ways to pronounce it. So Carla, I invoke the Wayback Machine a lot in my work as well. And even with COVID, I talk about the time before, because now we've got that. But I'm wondering if you would indulge us with a little bit of thinking about the springboard or the hoverboard into the future and where you're going next.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And, it's interesting what we've been able to discover through our pivot, right? And so we at Free Street pivoted completely to digital. We can't even get into one of our theater spaces because it is part of the Chicago Park District. And so the Chicago Park District is very strict on its COVID regulations. So we can go in to get mail, and that's about it. So we literally are working remotely fully. But what that has afforded us is actually the biggest takeaway has been a gateway to accessibility. So we built an accessibility budget into this current fiscal year's budget. So making sure that there is for ASL interpretation, captioning. So and also the fact that we've been able to reach national and international audiences with our work in ways that we had never been able to do before. And so to that end, I don't think that there will ever be a world that we are either exclusively live or exclusively virtual, but that we now have, this other avenue in which we can do the work and execute the work, depending on kind of where we're at and what the project is. So the added benefit is that now we have this other stream that we're able to think and reimagine in that we didn't have before, as much as we miss the live component, right? And as much as we miss being together. This is also, we have a for hire wing called Free Street Talks, where we take our devising process and we create custom designed active dialogues with organizations and companies, from advertising to education, and everywhere in between. And to that end, we've been able to increase our for hire revenue because we're able to do virtual workshops in ways that we hadn't been able to do before. So, there's also a ton that we're not able to do. We were supposed to do when the pandemic hit, we were actually supposed to go do an exchange in Puerto Rico with another theater company. And so that is certainly put on hold indefinitely. And so there are clearly things that you're unable to do, but the things that we will take with us are certainly the ways that we can expand accessibility, the ways that we can expand our ability to do the work, and really expand our flexibility and our nimbleness in that work. Thank you.
So I had dropped in the chat that we'd go to about 6:10.
Okay.
Right about there. So Carla, I love learning from you in your plants throne. It's been so brilliant to be able to have insight into your work and your work at so many various levels, from on the ground in the communities to like enacting policy and change with the electeds. So thank you for modeling and traversing all those levels and showing us that we can do that too. It's been such a blessing to learn from you. So thank you. And I look forward to more and more learning.
Thank you all. Thank you for listening.
Be well.
I want to save the chat.